Well, this is kind of reminding me of the moment when I debated Rick Warren once at Saddleback, just in his office. It was just the two of us and John Meacham, who was moderating, and he was telling me that basically without God, people would just be raping and killing, and that you require this as an anchor for an ethical life. And he even said of himself, I mean, I don't believe this when anyone says this, but this is sort of the bluff that never gets called. He said of himself that if he didn't believe there was a hell, he would be raping and killing.
Yeah, and I don't agree with that. Right. That's actually not right. Something that I fully agree with. But I do agree with the idea that without
I'm glad to hear that.
Fair enough, but but what I do believe is that a scientific materialist worldview cannot construct a moral system, because is has nothing to do with ought. Science is about is and has no capacity to say anything about ought other than constructions that are based in a notion of free will that you yourself reject.
I'm happy to get into all of that. If time is short, but I've written 2 books on those two.
I know, I've read them.
But if that were true, how would you explain the moral character of my life? I mean, assuming I'm not raping and killing people, or living a life that you would recognize to be ethically well structured. Yeah.
I just said moments ago, I don't think that you have to be a religious person to lead a moral life. I do think that there has to be a religious underpinning to a moral system, because I don't think that you're using terminology that is based in certain assumptions about human nature that I'm not sure that you are recognizing that you reject. Right? Let's take the scientific materialist worldview at its very base. Okay, at its very base, we are basically balls of meat wandering through the universe with a bit of self-awareness attached. We're sort of Spinoza's stones that have been thrown, and we know that we've been thrown. We don't have control over our own behavior. We don't have control over what we do. We don't have the capacity to react.
No, well, first of all, many people who would take an evolutionary picture of ourselves also imagine that we have free will.
I've never understood that perspective, to be honest with you.
I'll put the free will piece in play here, because actually I think there are moral insights we can have when we see through the illusion of free will, which we really can't easily have without doing that. And then I want to bring you in here, Eric. You're very, very patient.
Not fallen for that twice. Well, I mean, I think one of the problems is that in some very weird way, because Ben is wearing a kippah, we think of him as being very orthodox, pious, and religious. In fact, I'm always struck by just how much he eschews any appeal to text in his public argument. So for functional reasons, I very often see him in a largely atheistic context. I find, Sam, that you're always focused on what is, to my way of thinking, very clearly a form of Judaism expressed as atheism.
That really does sound anti-Semitic somehow. I'll have to ask my rabbi how I just got insulted.
I don't know, Sam, how much are you being paid tonight?
And, as much as I take a scientific worldview, I find that if I'm really honest with myself, I have a lot of certainly dialectical tensions that I can't resolve, needs for meaning that I can't find easily met within the rational systems. I think that the is and ought is a good distinction. I think a lot of this has to do with pre-existing architecture that predisposes us, even though our rational minds may know better, towards something that functions very much in an as-if religious context.
Well, let's just take is and ought for a second, because here's one way those two things collapse for me. If understanding how the universe is altogether, all the possibilities of experience, all the ways minds emerge, all of the kinds of good lives and bad lives, and all of the mechanisms that would determine one path over another, a complete understanding of the mind and the cosmos. That's all the is. All the is there that is there to be understood. If understanding that couldn't give you a complete picture of what you ought to do, where would you go to get that picture? If you sum all the facts, how does that not give you a way to chart your course in this universe?
Well,
what else is there to inform your life?
Well, there are these things that we notice in our minds that we can that run through our fingers like quicksilver, that aren't exactly facts, these intuitions, these things that gnaw at us, even though we know the answer, we feel superstitious, we feel guilt. How economists talk about utility as a one-dimensional object, but how many kinds of utility and disutility? I can be happy, I can be interested, I can be fulfilled, all these different ways of tagging, utilities and disutilities. And if you just notice your mind, you'll notice that there are all sorts of things going on in it that really aren't about facts. And I don't know where they originate, neither do you.
But see, but just translate what you're saying, sure. I mean, how I'm hearing what you're saying. You're telling me facts about the mind, which I agree with. I mean, there's kind of a congress in there. You guys decided that there was like objective reality when you were having that conversation, and I suppose that there's probably objective reality, but I think that a lot of what goes on is that we've been in the shallow end of science, where more or less, me and let's say this gentleman over here share enough that we can probably agree that the square root of 2 is provably irrational. I believe that that's probably an objective fact, but I don't believe proof checking is objective, because we have things like the Amabi problem that sit in the literature for years and we think it's proved, but it turns out we didn't have the right proof. So we have situations in which we've been picking low-hanging, easy fruit to console ourselves that we can all get at the objective reality. We've all seen optical illusions where, some color is exactly the same wavelength, but it looks two different ways because of the surroundings. Okay, but so that's a great example. Let's linger there for a second.
So again, we thought we knew what we were talking about, and then we find out at a deeper level that we didn't, and then we think we know what we're talking about again, and then it can reverse again.
But that move to the deeper level is more facts. It's more context. It's more objectivity.
Right, but we already agreed on something that turned out not to be true as objective fact. And then, so the point is that I'm not entirely sure in any of these. Like, if I take this irrationality of the square root of 2, there's a concept called not worth worrying about. Well,
that does a lot of work.
It's just not worth worrying about whether or not somebody's going to find a mistake in that proof, because it's so short. When it comes to something like the ABC conjecture, it's been going on for how many years? We still haven't, gotten our arms around it. We're now not in the shallow end quite so much. And so my concern is that it doesn't do a lot of damage to say we can prove that the square root of 2 is irrational and that that's an objective fact, up until you start trying to extend that, to more and more complicated proofs. And then it actually matters that the original concept was the outside proof may exist, but proof checking isn't objective, and therefore we may never exactly know, but there are things that aren't worth worrying about, and we call them objective fact for convenience. Sorry.
All right, so let me make an objective, what I think is an objective claim of fact that I think has moral, that you won't agree with, Ben, that I think has moral consequence that we should grapple with. So it connects to a very real-world issue like wealth inequality, right? So wealth inequality is a problem if you think it's a problem, or it's inevitable if you think it's inevitable. But I think everyone would agree that some level of wealth inequality would be intolerable and that we would want to correct for it. But wealth inequality is just one kind of inequality. There's every other kind of inequality, and there's this fact that none of us. And this goes to the free will issue. So what we imagine is that people, they have a certain inheritance. They have their genes. They have their environments. You didn't pick the fact that you weren't born yesterday in Syria. You were born in a stable society when you were born. We can't truly own all of our advantages. We didn't make ourselves. But most people feel that there's something like a ghost in the machine that has free will that can make the best of even a bad situation. Now, I think you probably agree that some situations are so bad that the deck can be so stacked against you that it's just life is unfair. Here are claims about you that I think are true and have kind of should be morally salient. You didn't make yourself. You didn't determine anything about yourself that you would use as an exercise of your own free will. So you're very intelligent, you're very literate, you're very interested in things that get you ahead in all the ways you've gotten yourself ahead. You didn't create that about yourself, right? And obviously there's a genetic component to that, there's an environmental component to that, maybe there's just, cosmic ray bombardment that can help or hurt. Who knows what influences are there, but none of that is something that you have authored. And that's true of everyone in the room. You have exactly the disposition you have, the effort you have. If you wake up tomorrow morning with twice the capacity for effort and grit that you had yesterday, you won't know where that came from. If it comes from a book you read, you can't determine the fact that the book had precisely the influence it had and not a little bit less or a little bit more. Well, you are part of a system of influences. And so this is a picture, in my view, that just makes a mockery of the notion of free will. Right, it goes down to the smallest possible case of my getting to the end of the sentence. Right, it's just like if I have a stroke now, well then sorry I can't do it, but I didn't, and I didn't choose that either. So now that I think taking that on board does not rob us of morality. I think because we still have a preference between an excruciating plunge into civil war and needless misery, and building a viable global civilization where the maximum number of people thrive. So
you're using a lot of active verbs for a person who is a product
active.
of environment and genetics.
Well, but it's all happening. Like if I were, we can build robots that act, right? And I'm moving my hands now, but I honestly don't know how.
But is the robot moving the hands? Or, I mean, the point that I'm making is when you say we can discern, we can build, we can create, we can decide.
But it's exactly like you speaking now. You don't know how you follow the rules of English grammar.
I'm not arguing that you can't make a convincing case that I don't have free will. I'm arguing that you can't make a convincing case you can build a civilization on lack of free will.
Take this case. The moral relevance of this, and Eric, I'd be interested to know if you agree with this. It seems to me that once you admit you either won the lottery or you didn't on some level, that conveys a kind of ethical commitment or an ethical obligation that you wouldn't otherwise have. You can't be the person who then says everyone just is basically you're on your own. You either make it based on your effort or not. I mean, this goes to questions of should we have universal health care? It's not just an economic answer.
You're going directly from is to ought with no stop on the train at all.
Well, it's just
for literally decades. There were very wealthy and very sophisticated countries that took the premises that you are building upon and built some of the most repressive regimes in history.
Well, right? But they had other things going on. They had bad ideas of economics.
I agree.
They had personality cults.
I agree with all of that. Right. But the point that I'm making is that you are making definitive statements about value judgments with reference to a naturally selected interaction of biology and environment. I just don't know how you're getting from one to the other.
Owning the truth of biology does
do robots have morality is what I'm asking you.
Well, they certainly would if we built them to have conscious states that could allow for suffering and well-being. I mean, that's coming. We're going to have to ask that question.
So then we can be God, but God can't make us those kind of robots? Is the argument?
Well, no, but
should we maybe try taking the fun out of this?
I thought I was trying.
So, one possibility is that there's like a layer cake, and at the bottom you've got, quantum field theory, and then you get organic chemistry, and you build this thing up, and you've got natural and sexual selection, and then you get, systems of morality riding on top of this. And there's some sort of weird category error between the layers of this cake. So it may be that if you can get rid of quantum indeterminacy, that you have effectively Laplacian determinism and everything is a product of initial conditions. And that takes place at the lowest level, but there's no morality at the level of, exciting fields and electrons and quarks. So, you don't pair that observable, which is like, that quark is being unethical right now, with some behavior which, affected whether some synapse, fired. And so that morality thing has to do with this very high up layer, which is some sort of social organization, which is not fundamental. And so what I hear us doing is talking about free will down here, and talking about morality up here. And, one of the lessons of physics is that every layer of the cake has...
Well, it has its own language game associated with it. And
yes, we call those observables, right? Yeah. And so those observables are paired with what we might call effective theories, right? And so these effective theories are not to be mixed up. And so every time we get into one of these free will conversations, I don't know whether you're talking about we have as if free will. Who was forced to buy a ticket to tonight's event,
Well, no, but to answer that question, really, so did you actually?
I didn't have to buy one.
Yeah, well, I don't know. The night is young.
You guys should totally get in on this. But the point is that I'm perfectly happy with the idea that I have as if free will at the top of the layer cake, and if we can get rid of quantum observation and get back to Laplacian determinism at some higher level, that I have no free will.
But it's as if free will only because you actually are not aware of the proximate cause of your action in each moment.
I mean, if I look at a chaotic pendulum over at the Exploratorium, it may have a very clear path that's determined through Newtonian mechanics, but I'm not smart enough to figure it out. So effectively, I'm super surprised. I just sit there like an idiot, twirling it, thinking, "Oh wow, I didn't think it was going to do that." Even though I know the physics, right? So the point is that if I try to compute something that's much larger than I am, my computer can't handle that much larger system. So this is why sort of self-reflection leads to madness very often. And
I thought you said this was going to be fun.
Hopefully it's not that often.
I'm still really interested in the app that you're coming out with for meditation.
Don't hold your breath, but it is coming.
Okay. Yeah. But what I'm trying to get at is that the fun part of these conversations comes from making these category errors, and the unfun part comes from sorting it out. And then when I played Johnny Raincloud, everybody will say, well, okay, I guess that makes sense, but it's no fun anymore. And so that's what I'm worried about.
Mm-hmm. Well, but you're not disparaging the idea of a unity of knowledge, right? You're not, at each layer of the cake, you can make a smooth transition between layers that doesn't usurp your understanding of each layer.
I mean, I have a fair idea when my wife's going to be angry at me for not doing the dishes, but I can't recover it from quantum field theory, right?
Well,
so the idea is that maybe that the quantum field theory determines her behavior.
No, but there's nothing about doing dishes that violates quantum field theory. One presumes. I mean, so it's not that you have to live in a different worldview in order to talk about the human relations layer, the moral layer, the free will layer, or not.
I can do my best, but I don't find it useful to try to think about human psychology from the point of view of
quarks.
Of quarks.
Yeah.
But could organic chemistry, if some neurotransmitter is depleted? Yeah, so there are some ways in which these different layers can talk to each other, but there's no reason that I should be able to compute necessarily across these layers successfully, even if there is some sort of concept of entailment or determination.
What I'm interested in is kind of a first principle methodology of moving forward into the unknown, right? So what I object to in religion and in this notion of revelation is that there was some prior century where we were given the best ideas we're ever going to have on a specific topic, and we must cling to those ideas until the end of time. This is the analogy or the rubric that I find most convincing. It's like there's only ever been people talking about reality here, right? And therefore you can either locate yourself in a current, modern, open-ended conversation, or you can anchor yourself to an ancient one and never give yourself the freedom to rethink it. And you could have done it with Homer, you could have done it with Aristotle, you could have done it with Shakespeare, and the Hindus have done it with the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, and you're losing no sleep over whether or not you should do likewise, right? And so my sense is that we need to, every question of societal importance requires that we now outgrow the accidents of merely contingent history, outgrow the fact that people used to be living in geographical isolation from one another and linguistic isolation from one another for centuries, and outgrow, therefore, our religious provincialism and just get to a common humanity that's using the best tools available to solve the hardest problems.
So I have a couple of quick responses to that. The best tools available are all predicated on assumptions that can only be made about human action and that you fundamentally reject. Again, things like reason, things like free will. Why are we having a conversation here tonight? Why did anyone show up here tonight?
Okay, but this is a philosophical confusion that let me try to just address it. Reason does not require free will. Reason requires having a mind that can follow an argument. and can care about whether or not you're following it.
But me responding
accurately.
to your argument is not a matter of choice at that point. So what's the point?
But the thing is, reason is never a matter of choice. If I convince you...
Then why is reason superior to amygdala response, passionate amygdala response?
Well, because one, it's scalable. One, it's if I give you sufficiently good reasons for anything,
right,
you will helplessly believe what I believe. It won't be a matter of choice. You never choose what
but
you believe.
why are you giving me those reasons?
If I prove to you that
again, you're using a lot of active verbs for a guy who has no capacity to choose himself.
Well, no, but I'm doing no.
You're using my language, and then you're building a house using the bricks that I'm giving you.
No. To stick with reason, the one brick. Reason is a mode of influence whereby if you see the syllogism actually runs through, right? Or to speak of reason even more broadly, if I give you a set of facts that persuade you of something that before this moment you were unaware of or thought was untrue, you will helplessly take that on board if you're reasoning, right? So if I show you that 2 plus 2 makes 4 and you can't see it any other way even though you wish it made 5, you will helplessly believe that 2 plus 2 makes 4. You don't choose it. You never choose it.
Well,
it's the prototypical instance.
Given our current situation, I would argue that a lot of people choose not to believe that 2 plus 2 equals 4.
Well, yeah, but that's a failure of rationality.
I agree. But you're not making a moral case for rationality. You're making an effective case for rationality.
I'm making a case that rationality is the quintessential moment where free will is not in evidence. If I show you,
and then I'm asking you, why do you care?
No, but that's changing the subject. Let's just take this one brick.
No, that was always my subject.
But you're saying you can't have reason without free will, or the reason presupposes.
No. What I'm saying is that you cannot have reason without making an assumption about the function of the human mind that is not evidenced by evolutionary biology or science.
No. Reason maps on. Well, Eric, help me here, but. Reason, in my view, reason maps onto reality. I mean, there's a fit between. It's not a perfect fit. I mean, hence our predicament. But
what I'm asking is why you think the firing of certain neurons is more morally appropriate than the firing of other neurons.
Sorry, well, I would be happy to get to that, but let me just stick with reason for a second. Reason maps onto reality. That's why it is reason. Like just arithmetic. If I take 2 objects, I have 2 oranges here, and I hide them, and I add 2 more, right? You're in order to form any rational expectation of what's now behind the chair, you're doing arithmetic, right? That's just reasoning about objects. It's not the fact that is so reliably. But
you're making here's the problem, I think, in the disconnect we're having. I'm not arguing that you don't agree reason exists. I'm arguing that your whole mode of creating a societal morality is based on this reason. And you're making a moral argument that reason is superior to any other method of eliciting a response. The way that you are talking about reason is that reason is basically a key and you stick it in the lock of my thinking and suddenly the door opens. Why is that? So I'm asking you, there are many ways to open that door, including using a battering ram, which has been the preferred method of most governments over history. You need to make an argument to me why it is more moral. How are you getting to the ought of reason without any appeal to a morality that exists beyond you? Especially when you get to complex moral questions that are not 2 plus 2 equals 4. They're complex moral questions like what the tax rate should be.
Okay, but we have a situation in which reason is clearly the best technique for doing certain things. There are certain things for which that is the primary tool, right? But there are probably, I could advance the argument that when I need to defeat a prisoner's dilemma in order to win with somebody I love very dearly, that somehow I go into some sort of weird reverent state and the 2 of us agree not to screw each other over and we get better outcomes, and it can be that gives me a better outcome than if I had just applied reason in a particular way, or maybe it's not clear which reason to apply. Or if I ask you the question, what is the square root of -1? And you say, well, there is no square root of -1 until some years later somebody comes up with the complex numbers, right? There's a lot of nuance here, and I would say that I don't usually want to use reason, when I stumble on a bear, because it just takes too long.
But it's not irrational to run from a bear. You don't have to delude yourself about anything or to fight a bear. So it's not like this is the old trope of prove to me you love your wife, right? I mean, this is what Rick Warren says when you walk into his office.
No, all I'm suggesting is that we have responses that are adaptive, responses that are maladaptive. Reason has this beautiful capacity that I can force. Like if I'm in a math department, somebody hates my guts and they don't want to accept something, I can usually wrestle them to the ground. We don't need a referee, and they will finally cry uncle and say, yes, you proved it to me. Right? So this is like a beautiful thing, and I think you're very attached to it. I like it a lot. But if you notice that if you try this not in a math department but on Twitter, it doesn't work nearly as well. Right? So fundamentally, people are able to escape very, very easily, and they don't even seem to notice or care.
But we acknowledge that is a failure of rationality that should matter to them. And the thing is, it does matter to them when they notice it in others. And it can matter to them when you can show it to them in themselves, right? I mean, are you just closing the door to a hope that conversation can ever get us to converge with people?
No. But I am trying to say that fundamentally, I get into arguments in which, well, if you take Ben's rules for arguing with leftists, right? The whole point is, can I get you to agree to this? Can I get you to agree to that? Like it's a series of endgame chess moves, right? And pretty soon, he's got two rooks on the back rank, and your king has nowhere to go. And somebody says, okay, I think you sort of got me, but I bet if I went home, I could figure out what it is that I agreed to that proved to me that an 8-celled embryo is actually a human life that has to be protected, and I don't think that that's right. Right? And so, we all have these intuitions that are fighting our emotions, that are fighting our reason, and this kind of complex Mexican standoff. I hope that's not insensitive, but it's 2017, people. Yeah. I have no idea. That we don't really understand entirely. I think you can make a very powerful case for how well reason can work, and I think this is one of the reasons why so many people will show up when you decide to visit San Francisco. You can do more with reason than I can. I have to use all sorts of crazy hacks and emotion and intuition in order to get where I'm going, and I don't think I can do what you do.
We might be bounding reason as just a kind of a set of operations a little differently. Because again, going back to the bear, right? I mean, the antithesis to reason is not emotion. I mean, this split between reason and emotion has always been false. And what you feel when you're pretty sure that what I'm saying is bullshit is an emotion, right? The feeling of doubt, the feeling of no, you got it wrong, that sense that you want to jump in before I embarrass myself further, right? That's a feeling. I mean, we understand the neurology of that, and people who can't feel the consequence emotionally of their own incoherence they're just happy to confabulate, right? They have no truth testing, and one of them is now running the country. But it matters, again, to come back to your point, it matters because it's the only thing that scales. It's the only thing that you can put over the transom to a total stranger who is sane and who cares to have his map of the world actually fit the world to a first approximation. It's the only, it's like, how did we all get to this theater tonight? You make a left, you make a right, you make a left, you go, like the directions worked for everybody.
Yeah, it's the huge work. We're sitting under some super dangerous thing. We just trust that somebody went to engineering school, used a lot of reason, because otherwise we're toast, right?
Yeah.
It's actually starting to bug me. But but the issue is that, okay, so
but you don't need an unmoved mover to sit under this thing. You just need to know that somebody did their job.
Right.
But somebody who did their job with regard to the universe would be the unmoved mover from the religious point of view.
But what confuses me about Ben's perspective is that I think Ben has and we talked about this before, is that Ben talks about the unmoved mover in terms of what sounds to me like a boundary condition, which is not something that I would get up on Saturday morning to pray to, for sure. But then I think Ben has this much more personal God that accepts petitions and gives instructions, that he's much more reluctant to talk about in the same terms, because he absolutely wants to play nice with us who are not possessed of as much belief. And so I don't know Ben well enough to know how we get from Ben 1 to Ben 2, which I think would be very interesting. But I think that, in part what you and I come out of is this, let's be honest about it, Orthodox Jewish tradition that converts very nicely for periods of time into this, I can't bring myself to believe all this stuff in the 5 books of Moses, so I'll embrace social justice, morality, and a lot of philosophizing using these same techniques that were used in my great-grandfather's shul.
Right, but again, the primacy of reason and the promise of it is that it's the only thing that stands a chance here of being universal in even a way that's beyond humanity, right? I mean, this whatever we're calling reason ultimately is going to be inscribed in the future machines.
Okay,
I think
if
again,
you look at Kerala, right? And you have the school of astronomy that came up with infinite series and almost got to the calculus before Newton and Leibniz. And what were they? They were doing it in religious verse in India, where they practiced that wrong religion, right? And so, that wrong religion was also coming up with unbelievable stuff. And I think what it really has to do with is there is some set of hooks that have to be hooked in the human mind that have something to do with religion or morality or some kind of social construction, so that we don't spend our time, coveting our neighbors' oxen or wives or what have you, and almost
wives plural.
Yeah. And
it's coveting your neighbor's ass, but that's reserved for Congress.
But what we keep doing is we keep finding this. There is some sort of conserved Platonic or prototypical religion that each of our religions are some sort of, particular instantiation of. And I think that what's tough is that once you get to the point where you actually, swim back up and you say, I really have no idea why I believe that original thing. Okay, that's fine, but you still have something that needs to go there, or the whole thing begins to disintegrate. And that's why all 3 of us, in my opinion, are living in some kind of tension between reason and that other thing. And it's hard to talk about that other thing because it doesn't lend itself to the language of reason. But,
this is where I still get confused. I don't see the departure from reason for me is where you're pretending to know something you don't know, right? You're pretending to think that something is great evidence when it's obviously not great evidence, and you recognize it to not be great evidence when someone else does it by another name. So, presumably you're not losing sleep over whether to convert to Islam. You see that there are 1.7 billion Muslims playing a very similar language game with a very similar book, but you really don't care about that language game and you don't care about that book. And you can see that their fixation on this revealed tradition is probably not what the universe is all about, right? And so my sense is you could sort of triangulate on any tradition that way. I mean, they could certainly.
I don't fully disagree with you. I mean, I think that the point of faith and revelation in any religion is going to be that it's relatively easy to attack. I don't actually think that that's. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that it's a rational thing to believe that God talked to a bunch of people on a mountain. Of course, that's not a rational thing.
Right. Especially when he's done it many times on many mountains, and these are irreconcilable.
Well, but again, it's not rational, so I don't believe that he did it many times on many mountains. I think he did it once on one mountain. But the fact is that but the fact that. But the problem is this, and I've said this to in expectation of talking to you. I've been saying this to people, that what I find is that it's very easy to tear down revelation. I think it's actually relatively easy to tear down any moral system that's based on atheism. What's very difficult is to build a moral system.
But nothing's based on atheism. I mean,
I agree, nothing is based on atheism. I'm with you.
No, but I mean, atheism is just not accepting any of these religious claims on offer. It's like non-Mormonism.
This is the part that I really just don't understand. The part that I really, on a fundamental level, I keep asking it about 5 different ways, and maybe I'm just thick. It's possible. And that is, you're making a lot of value systems and then citing reason as though you can derive these value-based judgments from the nature of the universe, and that has not been true for the vast majority of human history and is not true now in the vast majority of places across the world.
History, we won't draw these lessons from history. I mean, history is generations of confused people just like ourselves.
But you seem less confused, so I'm asking what makes you less confused?
One thing I think I'm less confused about is that we have, and this actually I think is a point of confusion that was relevant here. It's not that everything is based on reason. I mean, you can't justify everything, right? You can just begin to see what works, right? Like it's not like
so. Is it utilitarian morality that you're espousing?
Well, I mean, I don't answer to that name happily because I think there's a lot of confusion built into the way we teach that topic.
Utilitarianism also,
right?
I mean, it has inherent value judgments about what exactly is worth preserving and what exactly is worth destroying. So you're making assumptions there as well.
This is not a matter of assumptions. It's a matter of just realizing that we live in a space of possible experience. And experience can get very, very bad, or it can get very, very good. And we have no idea how bad it can get. I mean, we have some sense of how bad it can get, and we don't want to go there. But it presumably can get much worse in different minds of the sort that we don't have.
But the question now you do end up in a place of radical subjectivism because the question is bad for whom and from what perspective.
No, it's not. It's not subjectivism. It's just in fact it's honoring the fact that what we're calling subjective experience is part of the cosmos. This universe has an interior dimension that I would call consciousness. So there are systems that it is like something to be, right? The lights have turned on, and I'd be the first to admit that we don't understand how that happens scientifically yet. We don't understand the relationship between consciousness and the brain in any way that I can defend at the moment. But presumably the brain is involved, and we have a good reason to believe that that's the case. But we have this, what I consider a navigation problem. We as conscious systems can plunge into excruciating misery, or we can, based on all of the tools that we can get our hands around, and reason is one of them, begin to collaborate in a way that allows for more and more beauty and creativity and insight and flourishing. And we know we like that, right? And we don't have to justify that.
So are you using just a pleasure pain matrix?
No, it's everything, every conceivable facet of what you would recognize as your well-being, and facets yet to be discovered. And again, we were having a talk backstage about psychedelics. So one of the virtues, one of the virtues of psychedelics is that, if nothing else, it will prove to you that it is possible to have a very different experience than the one you're tending to have.
I'll take that one on faith.
And that. and certainly some of the experiences that people have on psychedelics seem to cash out the kinds of claims that mystics and very religious people have made through the ages. I mean, it's very easy to see the psychedelic experience through a kind of archetypically religious lens, but I would argue we need not. There's other ways to react to a burning bush beyond becoming an Orthodox Jew or a fundamentalist Christian, and I think we need a 21st century response to profundity.
To be frank, it's all very pithy to make, snide statements about biblical references and all that's well and good. I understand, but and the imagery is patently metaphorical and or ridiculous, right? I mean, there's no getting around that, and that's true.
Actually not. If you take acid, it can be quite literal. I mean, and again, I don't mean to be flippant about this, but it's like there is an experience you can have, and again, it's not, you don't need psychedelics to have it, but there's just an experience you can have if you pay sufficient attention. You can have an encounter with nature that, a burning bush is a little more than a metaphor.
But there are these primitives, right, that we're sort of embarrassed to say that we trade off against. So in my case, I often say that it's truth, meaning, fitness, and grace, right? Mm-hmm. And so very often, if I just do truth and just try to figure out is the glass here or it's not, I don't find that very fulfilling. I have this concept of meaning. Certain things feel meaningful. It's very hard for me to say what that is. It just seems to be a primitive that came with, toggled in my mind. Fitness. If what you're doing isn't successful, your lineage doesn't get to keep playing. So if somebody puts a gun to my head and asks me questions, I try to figure out what answers they want to hear, not what answers are true. And grace is this weird quality where if I had to take issue with Ben when he talks about, somebody insisting that they use gender pronouns that don't match genotype and phenotype, my feeling is that it's not a violation of truth. It's a violation of grace. I extend it as a courtesy temporarily before somebody takes it someplace where I have to retract it. That's a small difference. And so, fundamentally, when I brought that up on your podcast, there's like all of these people on Reddit who are like, okay, he's just admitting that he's not about truth, and it's this, you get into this truth mania without recognizing that you trade off against truth. We all do.
Well, no, so again, this is a place where either I don't totally take your point or I disagree, but what I think you want is for those things to cohere in a way that doesn't violate truth, right? So you don't have to lie to yourself to get the grace and the fitness and the...
I lie to myself. So do these people, and so do you. Is that the only way to get the meaning and the grace that you want? And I would say that's not the case. I mean, so meaning can become uncoupled from truth in a way that you would acknowledge is synonymous with madness, right? If you find meaning in things that no one else can recognize as meaningful, and you talk too much about it, you're the person who gets locked up. I practice this, right? And so when my son and I drive to school, I always tell him that I look at the license plates and they say things to me like, there's WMD right in front of me. It's like, I found WMD, or I found his name the other day. And he says, like, Dad, this is really creeping me out. And I said, well, but it's important to notice what it feels like to discern meaning where there is no meaning. It's important to be in touch with that as if madness experience in order to guard against madness. So I think that I am open, for example, to suspending my insistence on truth for periods of time. When I give the example of, square root of -1, whoever figured out the complex numbers probably started saying, there's no solution. Okay, what if something, I don't even know what it is, and you're groping around in the dark, and the hand waving comes out, and you start lying about things. And then you can find them, right? And so you sort of take an advance on the truth, and you go into these other spaces, and then hopefully, if you're lucky, you get to higher ground, and you can start talking about truth all over again. Yeah, but
that's a kind of happy spiral, which is not the same thing as delusion, or it's not sustained delusion. I mean,
it's not sustained delusion.
Basically, you want to say you want to perturb your consciousness in ways so as to depart from rigor, so that you can get back to rigor a better.
Right, but it is delusion for a period of time, as per your acid trip, right? And
I did have an acid trip where I was not planning to confess my psychedelic misadventures, but it seems apropos, and this story will prevent Ben from ever trying acid. This is a perfect example of meaning and awe and everything else, all the good stuff, becoming uncoupled from its appropriate object. I was on acid, needless to say, and staring at a photograph. I was staring at a human face that I was taking to be just the most kind of radiant exemplar of sainthood I had ever seen.
President Trump.
And I'm almost as inappropriate. And I'm staring at this thing and having, the beatific vision in the eyes of another. And, if anyone has ever taken acid and looked at a photograph, you know that this of a person, you know what I mean. But I was staring in awe for an eternity. And then when I came down to the point where I could recognize who I was staring at, it was a cover of TV Guide with Dick Van Dyke looking completely maniacal. So yes, I mean you can have the beatific vision in a puddle of Coke on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
But
for some reason you've never let go of Bye Bye Birdie.
Yeah.
I'm worried we're going to have a sixth book of Moses before long.
But the issue is, I think the struggle is to get the most meaningful moments personally, and the most useful ways of thinking personally and collectively, to align in such a way that we can. I mean, the only way to play a language game successfully with other people is to not have it be the cover of TV Guide and Dick Van Dyke, and have it be something that is an appropriate object of everyone else's attention, so that you can communicate your experience of meaning. I mean, that's the challenge of remaining sane and collaborating with others.